Imagine the existence of a condition which affects roughly 300 million people worldwide, can spread to every part of the body, and causes debilitating pain that makes it difficult to function in daily life. Would you believe it if I said we have no idea what causes this condition, no way to diagnose it without surgery, and no cure? Although difficult to fathom, this condition does exist, and it's called endometriosis. There is a massive gender gap in health research worldwide, with conditions that affect women being systematically underfunded relative to their disease burden. I've put up some statistics here so you can take a look at them. When equalizing the research landscape between the sexes, endometriosis is one of the biggest questions scientists must answer. Personally, I like to call it the cancer of female health. So what is endometriosis? It is essentially the growth of the uterine lining called the endometrium outside the uterine cavity. The reason this is so dangerous is because just as the uterine lining responds to changes in hormones, so does this displaced endometrial tissue. The tissue thickens and bleeds, but it cannot leave the body, which causes pain, disrupts organ functioning, and can cause infertility, inflammation, diarrhea, constipation, and blood in the stool and urine. It also has what is called a high burden of comorbidity and frequently presents alongside conditions such as cancer, autoimmune disease, asthma, allergies, and cardiovascular disease. I knew I wanted to research endometriosis for the Pioneer research paper, but there's so much that we don't know, it was difficult to figure out where to start. So I decided to look at the overlap of endometriosis with autoimmune conditions, just to make the scope a little bit narrower. My paper is trying to answer two questions. Firstly, why are autoimmune conditions a common comorbidity of endometriosis? And what does that overlap tell us about the cause, development, or treatment of this elusive condition? My investigation of these questions began in the Expression Atlas, where I found all the genes over or underexpressed in endometriosis and 7 autoimmune conditions. I realized that in order to evaluate the common causation, it was not enough to only know which genes were being dysregulated, but in what direction. The same genes being overexpressed in endometriosis and underexpressed in an autoimmune condition would clutter the data. So I split the genes into those that were upregulated and those that were downregulated, and then compared the lists to each other. I found 65 unique genes shared by endometriosis and at least one autoimmune condition, of which 10 were shared by endometriosis and multiple autoimmune conditions. I researched these 10 genes further to find patterns. Here are my 3 major findings. Firstly, there is a peculiar pattern in the gene dysregulation in the top 3 autoimmune conditions. Look at rheumatoid arthritis. Out of the 33 genes implicated in this condition, a whopping 28 are downregulated. Similarly, with inflammatory bowel disease, which has 7 of its 8 genes downregulated. However, the opposite is true with Sjogren's syndrome, which has 23 of its 25 genes upregulated instead. All this evidence points to the presence of a deeper biological phenomenon, a difference in the way each autoimmune condition overlaps with endometriosis. This would be an interesting topic to study further. Next, and I believe this is the most important finding of this paper, all 10 genes were found to be connected to cancer and or metastasis. Now, here's why this is interesting. Cancer and endometriosis are both mechanistically very similar. They both display an uncontrolled and unnecessary growth of body tissue, and endometriosis even displays metastasis-like growth outside the pelvic cavity, with endometriotic tissue having been found in the heart, the brain, and the skin. On the other hand, autoimmune conditions and cancer seem mechanistically opposite. One condition damages healthy body tissue, while the other fails to destroy malignant cells. And yet, 10 to 30% of cancer patients have an autoimmune condition. How? And what can this tell us about the endometriosis autoimmune overlap? Cancer can cause autoimmune conditions called paraneoplastic syndromes. These are a group of conditions that occur when the immune system launches an attack on tumors, tumorous proteins, and tumorous hormones, and end up affecting healthy body tissue instead. Something similar has been suggested as a cause for the comorbidity of endometriosis and autoimmune conditions, where the inflammatory cytokines released by endometriotic tissue trigger an immune response. But the opposing mechanism has also been suggested. Autoimmune conditions have demonstrated an increased risk of cancer development compared to controls, which can be attributed to many reasons. Chronic inflammation increases the likelihood of DNA mutations. Autoimmune dysregulation causes failure in immune surveillance, and immunosuppressant therapy can also have its effects. So the question is, what is the right answer? Do autoimmune conditions cause cancer, or does cancer cause autoimmunity? And the answer to that is both, probably. Just as the up and down regulation in genes across different autoimmune conditions had disparity, it is likely that different autoimmune conditions have differing relationships to cancer and endometriosis. Another thing that the connection between autoimmune conditions and cancer reveals is a potential treatment avenue. Traditional treatments for cancer, which stimulate the immune system, were thought to harm those with existing autoimmune conditions. However, recent studies have found that the use of immunosuppressants in conjunction with immunotherapies for those with cancer and autoimmunity have shown promising results. Similar studies on the use of immunotherapies have been conducted for endometriosis alone, although they are in the early stages. This evidence suggests that those with comorbid endometriosis and autoimmune conditions can use an immunosuppressant immunotherapy cocktail to treat that condition, which would be a valuable avenue for further research. Moving on to the third major finding of my research, the connection of endometriosis and autoimmune conditions with infertility. Of the 10 key genes, 3 had connections to reproductive complications. P2RY14 has been found to be significantly upregulated in those with recurrent pregnancy loss or the failure of 2 or more consecutive pregnancies, for which it is being researched as a potential biomarker. Next, NDC80. The upregulation of this gene is associated with the improper segregation of chromosomes during meiosis, or aneuploidy. A study found that the risk of aneuploidies was 0.6% in live births, and the risk increased 100-fold in spontaneous abortions compared to 10-fold in stillbirths. A greater likelihood of aneuploidy can cause repeated early pregnancy loss and make it difficult to carry a fetus to term. PTK4, the third gene, was found to be frequently downregulated in those with unexplained recurrent spontaneous abortion. This gene limits the migratory and invasive properties of 6 to 8-day-old embryos, which affects placental development and causes early miscarriage. Before I end this presentation, I'd like to highlight 2 more observations made during the research process that we don't know much about, but would be interesting to research further. One of the 10 key genes, TMEM200A, had only 9 papers published about it on PubMed, so we don't know much. But when I queried it on GTEx, I found that all major bulk tissues it was expressed in were what you would expect from a gene dysregulated in a condition like endometriosis: the uterus, fallopian tubes, ovaries, and the cervix. This gene could be a key to understanding endometriosis, so it would be valuable to research further. Additionally, several of the study's key genes were implicated in conditions related to skin, including hypertrophic scar tissue, which is when collagen develops on your wounds and gives it the raised or textured look, and Grafman syndrome, when skin grafts are rejected and cause immune dysregulation, and treatment-related mortality in grafts. Key genes were also highly expressed in sun-exposed and/or non-sun-exposed skin. Further research could be helpful in explaining this connection. And with that, we come to the end. To conclude, the genetics of endometriosis and autoimmune conditions revealed a disparity in dysregulation across autoimmune conditions, a cancer connection, and links to infertility. My analysis reveals research opportunities for the cause, comorbidity, and treatment of endometriosis. And I hope that the women suffering from this condition can expect better healthcare outcomes soon. Thank you.